Good evening and welcome to the press conference following the European Council. We will start with a press conference, and I would like to announce you that it will be in two stages. So the first stage, the President of the European Council will announce the decision on top jobs, and we have here the three candidates, including the President-elect of the European Council that should be joining us via video from Portugal. After the announcement of the top jobs, we will continue with the second part of the press conference on the following topics on the agenda. So we'll start with the first part. President, you have the floor.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Mission accomplished. The European Council has delivered. You know that we had important topics that we needed to fix today, and we did it. And it's a great pleasure and a great honor for me to announce the decisions that are made by the European Council tonight. J'ai le plaisir de vous informer des décisions qui ont été prises concernant les nominations pour le prochain cycle institutionnel. Antonio Costa a été élu président du Conseil européen. Ursula von der Leyen a été proposée par les chefs d'État de gouvernement pour assumer la présidence de la Commission pour le prochain cycle institutionnel. Et Kaja Kallas a été proposé pour devenir haut représentant. Ça veut donc dire que le Conseil européen a assumé pleinement sa responsabilité. On avait des sujets importants, essentiels, peut-être même lourds à l'agenda, et c'est en quelques heures que nous avons été capables, plus vite que prévu, puisque 2 jours de réunion étaient programmés pour ce Conseil européen, nous avons clôturé l'ensemble des points, y compris les nominations ce soir, ce qui est un signal fort que nous envoyons aux citoyens européens. C'est un signal fort en termes de démocratie européenne, puisque les leaders ont pris en considération à la fois le résultat des élections européennes, ont pris en considération les travaux préparatoires à l'agenda stratégique, et maintenant le processus institutionnel va se poursuivre, s'agissant de la présidente de la Commission et de la haute représentante, avec le Parlement européen qui aura à assumer sa responsabilité dans les prochaines semaines. Et j'ai eu l'occasion la semaine passée de représenter le Conseil européen dans les réunions préparatoires de coordination au Parlement européen. Je souhaite le meilleur à celles et à celui qui vont assumer ces responsabilités pour les 5 années qui viennent. Je souhaite beaucoup de succès dans l'accomplissement des tâches qui seront les vôtres.
Unfortunately, we are trying to sort the connection with Portugal, and but I think President von der Leyen will go next to you. Thank you.
Yes, I would plain and simply like to express my gratitude to the leaders who endorsed my nomination for a second mandate as President of the European Commission. And I'm very honored and I'm delighted to share this very special moment, hopefully soon on screen. Antonio Costa, but also my dear friend Kaja Kallas. Antonio Costa as President of the European Council and Kaja Kallas as HRVP, so Vice President of the next Commission. For me, this means that I now will seek confirmation from the European Parliament on my appointment after presenting my political guidelines for the next 5 years. So there's another step to do on the way forward. Thank you.
Prime Minister Kallas, you have the floor.
Yes. I'm really honored by the support of the Council. This is enormous responsibility in this time of geopolitical tensions. There's war in Europe, but there's also growing instability globally that also are the main challenges for the European foreign policy. My aim is definitely to work for the European unity, protect European interests, values in the charged geopolitical context, and build global partnerships as well, which is very, very important at this time. So I will strive to work with the member states as well as all the institutions, and of course the next step is to focus on the hearings in the Parliament and talk with the MEPs to achieve their support. I'm very glad that I get to work together with Ursula von der Leyen and Antonio Costa. So I think we make a great team to achieve these goals for European Union. So once again, I'm very, very honored and grateful. This is not an honor only to me, but also to Estonia, a small country that has been in European Union for 20 years this year. So it's a rather symbolic anniversary. So thank you.
Thank you very much. We're still trying to connect with the President-elect, so I think we'll continue trying, but we will continue with the second part of the conference. Prime Minister Kallas, thank you very much. And we'll invite the Prime Minister of the Belgian Presidency to join us on the stage, and we'll continue with the next, with the rest of the topics from the agenda. President Michel, you have the floor.
Merci beaucoup. C'est qu'il y avait beaucoup de points extrêmement importants à l'agenda. And the first one I would like to mention is the strategic agenda. And you know that this is the responsibility of the European Council to fix the orientations for the 5 years to come. You know that we have started to prepare this important document, this important strategic orientation many months ago. In fact, we started in Grenada under the Spanish presidency, and it's very good that today we have decided to finalize this process. 3 important pillars. First, the democratic values, the democratic principles. This is the inspiration. This is the guiding compass for all of us. It is important never to give up, but to support those fundamental principles and values. This is my first point. The second point, we understand that we have to develop our competitiveness, that we have to support all possible measures for more prosperity across the EU. You know that we have decided 5 years ago that the digital transition on the one hand and the climate transition on the other hand should be our economic engine for the future. And we understand that we need to adapt the paradigm of our economic prosperity, our economic development, and we want to do that in a way that supports our competitiveness, that in a way that supports our industrial base and technological base on the one hand, in a way that supports our SMEs on the other hand. We had the occasion a few weeks ago, together with Enrico Letta, through his report, to have in-depth debate in the European Council on those topics. And in the strategic agenda, I think we are making some additional steps, and we have a very strong ambition in that field. We are also determined, you know, to be much more efficient, much more effective in the field of the European defence, security, European defence. We want to develop flagship projects. We want to work together to identify how we can make sure that we'll dedicate more financial support in the field of defence, more joint procurement, more common projects in line with NATO. NATO is a cornerstone for our collective defense and security, and you will see in this document this ambition in the field of security and defense, including in the field of the protection of borders. We understand that migration is a serious challenge. Under this institutional cycle, under the Belgian rotating presidency, we made significant steps when we decided to agree on the Migration Pact. On the one hand, we have developed more and more concrete initiatives in cooperation with third countries in the field of migration, and we know that this is needed to work in a cooperative way to address this fundamental challenge. And we do not forget that with the geopolitical context, we have made important decisions in the field of enlargement. This was, by the way, one more occasion today to discuss this topic. It means that we have to do our homework. A process for internal reforms will be needed. We have agreed on a framework in that field, and we ask those who would like to join the EU to do their part. It means that they have to put in place the reforms that are needed. They have also to resolve some disputes from the past so that we can make more progress in the field of enlargement. This is the first topic, strategic agenda, strong message, strong signal that we send with this agreement in that field. A second point, very quickly, I would like to make is Ukraine. We had the occasion to host Volodymyr Zelensky. He had the occasion to address the European Council, and there are 4 points I want to insist on. The first one, we have agreed on security arrangements, security agreements, the EU and Ukraine on the one hand, but some of our member states have also decided today to sign some bilateral agreements with Ukraine. This is very effective, very operational, very concrete. It means more military support for Ukraine, more concrete support for Ukraine, and this has to be sustainable. This has to last. Second point, financial support. You remember that in the G7, we made an important decision a few weeks ago when we decided to mobilize an additional package of 50 billion euros for Ukraine. We had the occasion to discuss this topic in the European Council. I'm very confident that in the weeks to come we'll make huge progress to make it happen and to make sure that we decide on the measures that will be needed to provide this envelope to Ukraine. This would be a signal to Russia that we are not intimidated. It would be a signal to Russia that there will not be any war fatigue in Europe, and that we are ready to support Ukraine for as long as it takes. Third point regarding Ukraine, the IGC. You remember that about 1 year ago we decided to grant the candidate status to Ukraine. Very quickly, Ukraine implemented reforms that are needed to make progress on the EU path, and I'm very pleased that a few days ago we agreed to have the first IGC and to open the negotiations with Ukraine. And finally, the peace summit and the peace formula. We had the occasion with Volodymyr Zelensky to discuss what could be and what can be the next steps after the successful meeting that took place in Switzerland. We know that we have to engage with the international community to defend those principles anchored in the UN Charter, especially the territorial integrity and sovereignty. So the agenda, Ukraine. One last point, this is the Middle East. You know that we don't accept the double standards. We want to defend and to promote the international law and the international humanitarian law always and everywhere. And that's why it is important that in a united way, once again, we expressed a strong position on the Middle East. We condemn this terrible attack launched by Hamas. We support the right for Israel to defend itself, and we support the international humanitarian law. It means that we fully support this UN resolution. We ask a ceasefire, an immediate ceasefire, the release of all hostages without any precondition, and we want the humanitarian access for the people in need in Gaza. We support the two-state solution, and we want to engage with our partners in the region, and not only in the region, to revitalize this political process. And we know that a credible pathway to the Palestinian statehood is the way forward. In the conclusions, you will also see what we say about the ICJ and the importance to implement the decisions of the ICJ, and we will also see that we are very attentive on the situation in Lebanon, and we think it's important to support all the efforts to avoid any further escalation in that region. 3 points pour les débats du Conseil européen aujourd'hui. Vous verrez qu'il y a d'autres sujets que je ne vais pas aborder parce qu'ils se retrouvent dans les conclusions écrites auxquelles vous aurez accès. Mais je ne peux pas clôturer ces quelques mots sans féliciter et remercier la présidence rotative belge de l'Union européenne qui avait la lourde charge de mener cette présidence au moment du terme de ce cycle institutionnel. C'était dans un moment où il était important de clôturer des travaux législatifs avec le Parlement européen. De très nombreuses réalisations ont pu être enregistrées, et au travers du Premier ministre, c'est l'ensemble des équipes diplomatiques et des équipes d'experts belges qui se sont mobilisés pour faire en sorte que la présidence puisse assumer son rôle de honest broker, son rôle de bâtisseur de consensus, de compromis au sein du Conseil européen. Merci, cher Alexander, et bravo à toi et à l'ensemble des équipes.
Thank you very much, President. With your permission, we now have a very stable, connection with the President-elect Antonio Costa. So we would like to invite you to address the audience, and the President-elect, you have the floor.
Merci, Charles. Je veux tout d'abord remercier la confiance que les membres du Conseil ont déposée en moi en m'élisant comme le prochain président du Conseil européen. I'm delighted to be here today with Ursula von der Leyen and Kaja Kallas, and to soon be part of this team. They are both outstanding Europeans, and I'm sure our collaboration will be very successful to serve Europe and European citizens. Europe and the world are facing challenging moments, yes, but the European Union has demonstrated its resilience in the past, always finding strength in unity. And building unity between member states will be my main priority when I take up my position in December. Focus on putting on track the strategic agenda which the European Council has approved today. Mon cher Charles, je te désire les meilleurs vœux pour la continuité de ton mandat et permets-moi de dire quelques mots en português para agradecer ao governo português e ao primeiro-ministro Luís Montenegro todo o apoio que deu nesta minha candidatura.
Thank you very much. Thank you, President-elect. We will continue with the second part. We'll continue with the second part. President of the European Commission, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you, dear Charles, dear Alexandre. I want to start by thanking you, dear Alexandre, for an exceptionally successful presidency of the Council. You have managed to reach political agreement on over 45 files spanning all our major political priorities. It goes from the European Green Deal to digitalisation, from industry to the economy to enlargement. I think two proposals were exemplary. That is the Net Zero Industry Act and the Economic Governance Framework. But you also steered the first ever agreement on a midterm revision of the MFF. And this enabled, because it included, the 50 billion facility for Ukraine. And you delivered another highlight, that was the adoption of the Pact for Migration and Asylum. Certainly one of the most challenging sets of legislation this college put forward. I want also to emphasize that it's not only legislative files that you managed, but you also chaired the Industry Summit in Antwerp, the Social Partner Summit in Val d'Uchesse, and the Pillar of Social Rights Summit in La Hulpe. Now, during your presidency, in fact, just this week, we also adopted the 14th sanctions package against Russia. And also this week, we adopted new sanctions on Belarus that will align them with our Russian sanctions regime. I think this is a very strong sign of our continued determination to deprive Russia of the means to continue its war of aggression against Ukraine. And of course, big event on Tuesday, we launched the accession negotiations for Ukraine and Moldova. Today, in a further step, we have paid almost 1.9 billion euros in pre-financing under the Ukraine facility. So it was very fitting and good that we could discuss these developments in person with President Zelensky at the start of our meeting. And I was particularly honored to sign the security commitment between the European Union and Ukraine on behalf of the European Commission. We also presented to leaders the G7 initiative to provide Ukraine with loans of roughly $50 billion. And now we will work with our member states, with the G7 partners and Ukraine to put the necessary legislation in place, and we are looking forward to provide Ukraine with the relevant funds before the end of the year. We had many other topics, as you heard from my colleague Charles Michel. I want to have a second look at the security and defense element that was discussed. We all know, and it was said already this evening, that we are facing unprecedented and growing security threats. High-intensity war has returned to our continent, and Russia is an aggressive and disruptive power. It has rapidly transition to a war economy. Just one figure. It will spend over 7% of its GDP on defense this year. So, as we agreed in the Versailles Agenda, again last March, Europe as a whole needs to step up on defense. Let me give you 3 figures that show the necessity. If you look at the combined EU spending on defense from 1999 to 2021, so in 3 years, it increased by 20%. In that same time frame, China's defense spending increased by almost 600%, and Russia's defense spending by almost 300%. And this is even before Russia massively increased over the last 2 years its defense spending. We have taken various sources, from the strategic compass to the European Defence Industrial Strategy, to identify the defence capabilities that are required. We have on top, in addition, recently some member states that called for a European air defence shield, and others that called for the reinforcement of the Union's eastern land border. And if we take this all into account and based on non-classified sources, we estimate that additional defence investments of around 500 billion euros are needed over the next decade. There are some sources in the MFF, close to 11 billion euros, that could be topped up with another 11 billion euros of budget by the European Peace Facility. We have created already a toolbox for defence. Just a reminder, the European Defence Fund, the Connecting Europe Facility, or the European Defence Industrial Programme that has, for example, the flagship, the Eurodrone. But overall, more is needed. And therefore, as the Council had asked for, there are options if you come to the defence spending possibilities. The first is additional national contribution. The second option is agreement on new own resources for the European level. The proposal for that is on the table of the Council. Then, of course, there is a second question, whether leaders call immediately on those resources or whether they use the borrowing power of the Union budget upfront and call on these resources later. None of these options is easy. All of them have to be looked at with the political will to decide what to do together, but they have to be looked at seriously. Finally, a brief look at the strategic agenda. Indeed, I welcome its adoption because it prepares the next institutional cycle and sets the political priorities by the 27 leaders for the next years. So this provides an important input for the Commission to develop the next political guidelines that I would have to put on the table of the Parliament when it comes up to the vote in the Parliament. This strategic agenda starts with a very sober assessment of the new geopolitical realities. I will skip them because we've discussed them already tonight. The response to these challenges are very clearly defined in the strategic agenda, scaling up European defence from the spending to interoperability, but also a very clear look on the climate threats that are out there. So the goal to become the first climate-neutral continent while strengthening the competitiveness of our social market economies. A very strong focus on the topic of competitiveness. Of course, endorsement of implementing our twin, clean and digital transition and scaling up Europe's manufacturing capacity for clean technologies. So a wide range of topics in the strategic agenda, an important input for the political guidelines of the Commission, and I will leave it at that for the moment.
Thank you, President. Thank you, President. Prime Minister De Croo, you have the floor.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us. First of all, let me start by congratulating you, dear Ursula, dear Kaya, and Antonio, with the decision we took tonight. It is clear that the coming years will be a great challenge for the European Union. We have a war in Europe. Our economies are more than ever under pressure, but I am sure that you will deliver. And really, I'm happy with this decision. Europe is in great hands with the people that we have been able to decide and put forward this evening. This was also our objective of this presidency, that was delivering on an ambitious agenda for Europe. As you might remember, our presidency was about protecting our people, strengthening our economy, and preparing Europe's future and protecting our values. And I think we delivered on all three of those dimensions. First of all, let me maybe start with our legislative work. We concluded 69 files in the trilogue, and we closed about 40 files in the Council. That means that on average, for every working day during our presidency, we finished one file. And I think we did so in an inclusive and in a balanced manner, prioritizing our competitiveness agenda, implementing the Green Deal, implementing our security and migration policies, and having a forward-looking social and health agenda. That was the first point. Second point, we dealt, and I think we dealt with effectively, crisis on and at the shores of our continent. As being said, we secured the 50 billion Ukraine Reconstruction Fund. We reached a council agreement on using the profits from immobilized Russian assets. On top of that, we agreed on a 13th and on a 14th sanction package, which should limit the possibilities of Russia to further wage this war economy. We made an historic step by starting the negotiations last Tuesday with Ukraine and Moldova on accession. And beyond the war in Ukraine, of course, we also had the very horrific conflict in the Middle East, and it has really driven our agenda. European Council reached an agreement on a clear stance regarding the conflict, aiming for a sustainable ceasefire, for an immediate liberation of the hostages, and for an immediate humanitarian access. We imposed there also sanctions. Sanctions, for example, against terrorist organizations such as Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. And for the first time, also sanctions against violent Israeli settlers on the West Bank. This was a crucial agreement. And lastly, we supported the work on the future of the European Union. The Belgian presidency really put our competitiveness at the heart of the discussions for the next legislature. And this was driven by many elements. One was the Antwerp Industry Declaration. The second was the first ever nuclear energy summit. Thirdly, 2 social summits. Fourthly, the Letter report. We have also called for a new competitive deal for Europe alongside the Green Deal. And on top of that, we also prepared the Council's work on the reform agenda for the Union, for a Union in the future which might have more than 30 members, and being able to act in a more complex and hostile world than ever. On Monday, Hungary will take over at the helm of the Council. And I wish Prime Minister Orbán and the Hungarian presidency all the best in continuing to advance the legislative work, in maintaining our support for Ukraine, and in continuing a smooth transition to the next institutional cycle. Then to close, it was a great privilege, a great responsibility to work to the benefit of all EU citizens. It was a privilege for Belgium, and this was the 13th time that Belgium had this privilege. And also personally, it was really an honor to be able to take this role. The European Union is a great place to be oneself. It's a great place to live. It's a great place to work. It's a great place to invest, and it is a great place to thrive. Let us all work together and keep it that way. Thank you.
Thank you, Prime Minister. We will now open the floor to a few questions, and we start with Anna.
Hi, good evening. Ana Matos Neves with the Portuguese agency. My question will be for Mr. Michel. Do you think it was possible to please everyone with the deal reached on top jobs? And when it comes to Mr. Costa, do you consider that his situation is thoroughly clear legal-wise? We know there's no concrete allegation against him, but the investigation is still ongoing, so I would like to hear your thoughts on this. And for Mrs. von der Leyen, I would like to know your expectations on the collaboration with the cooperation with Mr. Costa. Thank you so much.
The first question, the European Council made a decision and made a clear and quick decision. In fact, we had one meeting 10 days ago, and tonight we made a decision. And this reflects the clear signal sent by the members of the European Council. It means that the members of the European Council trust the candidates that were chosen, and we are confident that with this team, this a good signal that we sent to the European citizens.
Thank you.
Yes, I am very much looking forward to working with Antonio Costa. I had the privilege to work with him already at when the Portuguese had the presidency of the Council. So therefore I know very well that he is very much focused. He is a hard-working politician. He is very goal-oriented, but he also has a wonderful humor. So I'm very much looking forward working with him.
Henry?
Thank you so much. Henry Foy, Financial Times. President von der Leyen, you did get a deal today approving you, but it didn't involve Italy. How you weren't supported today by Giorgia Meloni. Does it disappoint you that she didn't give her backing to your candidacy? And what's the political cost, do you think, to not have the third biggest economy in the EU behind you? And to the President and the Prime Minister, Viktor Orban takes over on Monday. What's your one piece of advice to him if he wants to make Europe great again? Thank you.
Good question.
So I think, first of all, I'm very grateful that I have the support of the European Council. Indeed, Giorgia Meloni abstained. And I think it is very important to work well in the European Council with the Prime Minister, with Italy, like with all other member states. So this is a principle for me which I followed all the time.
President?
No, I think there are two important elements in the weeks to come. First, this is one priority of the Hungarian presidency. This is the competitiveness deal. And when we had this Letta report debate in the European Council, the President of Hungary made very clear that it will be a fundamental priority, and this is good. I'll give you one example. Many of us think that the capital markets union is vital for the future of the EU, and I sincerely hope that by the end of the year some significant progress will be made, and I hope that the Hungarian presidency will work hard. This is the intention, I think, in that field. Is one first element. Second element, it was already said, but there is also responsibility to help for making possible that the institutional cycle will start on a strong base, and this will be also a responsibility for Hungary. And then the third point is very simple. I think that on the EU side we understand, because of the geopolitical challenges that we face, that we need unity, and we need to be determined to support international law and to support Ukraine, determined to make sure that we do not develop double standards, and that we are respected because we promote fundamental principles and values always and everywhere, without making sometimes some exceptions.
Mm-hmm. Maybe just to answer as well, the presidency does not mean that you're the boss of Europe. The presidency means that you're the one that has to make the compromise. Now, being in a position where you have to make the compromise is an interesting position to be in at least once in your life. So I can definitely recommend it to Mr. Orban.
Thank you very much. Jano. It's behind.
Hi, Jarno Hartikainen, Helsingin Sanomat. Question to President von der Leyen. When the Prime Minister of Italy did not support your nomination today in the Council, does that also mean that you've lost the votes of Fratelli d'Italia in the European Parliament when you seek the European Parliament's confirmation for your nomination?
Look, I will work with the whole Parliament. And with the members of the European Parliament, for me, is very important. You know the principles that we work with those who are pro-European, pro-Ukraine, and pro-rule of law. And I have to convince a majority. So we are in the process of building a platform with the EPP, the SD, and Renew. I will be reaching out to others too. I will be reaching out, for example, also to MEPs from other groups than the platform. And for me, it is a matter of convincing if possible, a broad majority for a strong Europe. So this is what I'm going to be working for the next, 3 weeks, intensively, and then we'll see.
We'll take 2 more questions. Razia, in the middle.
Thank you very much. Razia Akoc, Agence France Presse. It's kind of actually linked to that question, but my question is going to be a bit more emotional because in 2019 you had a razor-thin majority in the Parliament. It was perhaps 9 votes, if I'm not mistaken. Aren't you worried that given the current balance in Parliament, there is a real chance you could lose the vote? And you say that you're going to speak to MEPs singularly, so you do not think that you will need the support of the ECR then?
I will also work intensively with the national delegation because the experience shows that it is the national delegations that often take the decision. There is within the groups different voting patterns. So for me it's important to speak, as I said, with national delegations. This includes, of course, individual MEPs. So most of them are supportive, but with those, for example, who are critical or have questions, my duty is to get in contact with them and to answer the question. Of course, I will also go to the groups. This was the same in 2019. I went to almost all the groups that invited me. And of course, I will go to the groups that invite me this time too, to answer the question and to have a dialogue with them.
Irene?
Thank you, Irene Zarkadoula, Greek Public TV. Mr. President, what do you expect from the new institutional cycle and from your new colleagues? Madam President, what is the message are you going to convey to the MEPs why they should vote for you? And Prime Minister, what's next for you? United States or staying in Belgium?
Madam President?
Please.
No, you were first.
No, please. Okay, the next institutional cycle, no, you won't be surprised. I hope and I think that the strategy agenda will be the priority. And of course, the next step will be with the European Parliament, and I count on the institutional team to take the measures that are needed for the EU to be in a position to overcome all the challenges we face. You know that I believe in more sovereignty, I believe in more influence for the EU, and believe in more prosperity, in more commitment to defend the rule of law, the international law, and I think that this strategic agenda is a good framework because this is very clear. We know and we understand what are the priorities, and we are ready to act. At least in the European Council, we are ready to act so that we can overcome all the challenges, and it will be the task of the institutional team, the next institutional team, to work so that we can make Europe stronger, more influential, more resilient.
So over the last 5 years, I have already worked intensively with the European Parliament, and I think together we have managed to find good solutions to the manifold challenges that we had. I will not recall all the crises we overcame and the solutions we had to find, so we really charted a clear course for Europe on those major challenges. And this is the same spirit in which I will address the members of the European Parliament. I know many of them, but of course not the ones who are new, but many of them are very familiar to me, so I will reach out to them. I will listen to their ideas, and of course I will present my ideas, which is at the very end the political guidelines that I have to put on the table. And I think we share one common goal, that is not only a strong Europe, but also a prosperous Europe, and this is what we have to work on.
Yeah, thank you for your concern on my future. It's warming to hear that. Well, first of all, I will continue in a caretaking government. That's my role, and I will continue until there is someone who takes over. Interesting why you only gave me two options, being Belgium and the United States. There's many interesting things to do in Europe as well, I think.
Thank you very much. We'll wrap up the press conference here. Thank you and have a good night.
Oh. Thank you. Oops.
À l'agenda stratégique et maintenant le processus institutionnel va se poursuivre. C'est l'élection de la présidente de la Commission et voyons aux citoyens européens. C'est un signal fort en termes de démocratie européenne puisque les leaders ont pris en considération à la fois le résultat.
As President of the European Council and Kaja Kallas as HRVP, so Vice President of the next Commission.
It's definitely to work for the European unity, protect European interests, values in the charged geopolitical...
economic prosperity, our economic development, and we want to do that in a way that supports our competitiveness, that in a way that supports develop our competitiveness, that we have to support all possible measures for more prosperity across the EU. To be much more efficient, much more effective in the field of the European defence, security, European defence. We want to develop flagship projects, including in the field of the protection of borders. We understand that migration is a serious challenge. Under this institutional cycle, under the Belgian rotating presidency, we made significant steps when we decided to. A second point, very quickly, I would like to make is Ukraine. We had the occasion to host Volodymyr Zelensky. He had the occasion to address. One last point, this is the Middle East. You know that we don't accept the double standards. We want to defend and to promote the Gaza. We support the two-state solution, and we want to engage with our partners in the region, and not only in the region, to revitalize this political process.
Ukraine with loans of roughly $50 billion. And now we will work with our member states, with the G7 partners and Ukraine to put the necessary legislation in place, and we'll look to interoperability, but also a very clear look on the climate threats that are out there. So the goal...
2 social summits. Fourthly, the letter report. We have also called for a new competitive deal for